Hey, what's up, y'all? Greetings from Memphis, USA. My name is Ben Colar, and I just hope that everyone out there is feeling healthy, both physically and mentally, as much as you possibly can right now. And shout out to everybody who still came to Clarity 2020. So applause for you. And so first off, I want to thank Gina and her team for asking me to speak. I was honored. I'm excited. I'm excited for the speakers that are coming up. And yeah, let's get right to it. So quickly, a little bit about me. I'm originally from South Side Chicago, and I moved here to Memphis back in 2002, where I met my wife of 13 years, Samilia, and we have two knuckleheads, if you want to call them, Liam, who's 10, and Constance, who's 7. Currently, I am the creative director and principal of a branding firm here in Memphis called Baby Grand. I'm what the kids may call a sneakerhead, but I'm working on it. Promise I'm working on that. And fun fact, I hate camping. So, thought y'all should know that. My background is in graphic design. But over the years, my role has expanded a little bit to include more brand strategy. And so we'll be talking a good bit about that today. But back in the day, way back in the day, I did some front-end development. So back, CSS2 days, I was using CSS and HTML. But once they switched to CSS3, I couldn't keep up. I was like, all right, I'm out. I'm going back to Illustrator and let y'all do that. I'm gonna be over here, y'all be over there. And and I used to do a little bit of Flash too. Shout out to all the Flash developers who may or may not still exist. So shout out to y'all. We'll get started. So this talk is called The Importance of Perspective. And so, we'll begin this talk talking about establishing that perspective. This is the beginning of the process. So before we get started on the process, I wanted to give you just a quick little story. So a man enters an apartment, right? And when he enters the apartment, there's a woman sitting on a couch, and she's watching Netflix. And so the man comes in, and he sets his keys down. And when he sets his keys down, he looks at the TV and says, "Oh, you still using Netflix? Like, don't you know there's a ton of new streaming options out there? You got HBO Max, you got Quibi. My favorite is actually Disney Plus. Because first off, you got all of the Marvel stuff on there, right? We got classics like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You got classics like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You know what I'm saying? That's a good one. And then, hey, Black is King, right? Black is King. Beyonce. Who doesn't love Beyonce, right? And so, she looks at him, and she's a little perplexed, and so she goes, "Who are you?" So, obviously, the answer to that question at that point is very important, right? And one could even argue that should have been established before he even walked into the apartment in the first place, right? So, juxtaposition, similarly, and maybe less creepy, it's important for brands to establish a point of view and perspective with the audience before they can try to influence their behaviors. So the tool that we use at Baby Grand is actually called brand positioning. So in the brand positioning process, we have these 4 buckets, these 4 sort of unique factors of each brand, right? So under these 4 buckets, what we do is we try to gather as many relevant pieces of information and insight as possible, right? And then we take all of that information and those insights, and we distill them down to a one sentence phrase, right? And that is called our brand essence. And we'll talk a little bit more about brand essence a little later, but I wanted to quickly go through these four factors that we try to talk about. So So first we have alternatives. So that is, what would people do if your product didn't exist? We have attributes. What are the unique features that you have that your alternatives don't? You have value. How do the benefits of your attributes provide value to the audience? And then audience is what are the traits of someone who loves what you offer? Okay. So based on the insights and the information that we've gathered, right? What we then do, like I said, is take all of that information, compress it down to a concentrate, if you will, and that is this one sentence phrase that we call the brand essence. So this brand essence is the perspective, right? This is sort of the nucleus of the brand. It's also the origin of the brand, right? It's where the brand begins. At this point now, the brand exists. So it's similar to a robot becoming self-aware. I guess a little bit similar. So now we have our perspective, right? We have something that anchors why people should even pay attention to us in the first place. So during this process, I spoke about, finding all this insight and information that we put under these 4 buckets. It's important to search every corner and then prioritize, okay? So establishing a brand perspective takes quite a bit of work, takes quite a bit of consideration, right? It really does take searching every corner for relevant information and insight. But you turn around and you compress all of this information into a single thought, right? Sometimes getting to that single thought feels a little like throwing away valuable information. So the tendency is to sometimes have multiple strings of thought within your brand essence, which is confusing, or you have so much sort of empty language in your brand essence that it doesn't actually commit to anything at all. You'll have time. You'll have space. You'll have a place to include a lot of these ideas that you came up with, or a lot of these insights and information pieces that you gathered during the brand process. But it's important for the brand essence to stay singular in thought so that everything else can sort of branch off from. Again, this point of view, it's not a sales pitch. It's not an elevator pitch, right? It's not a list of your benefits, so it wouldn't be, we make rubber gaskets made out of this. Like that's not inspiring to a brand. It's more of a why you exist, right? So what it is it's quickly and decisively establishing why your audience should hear you out in the first place, let alone try to alter your behavior. So again, we've established in my previous story that, it's important to both introduce yourself and sort of gain trust with your audience before you can even affect their behaviors. You probably don't want a brand, all up in your Twitter feed telling you, what you should be doing, what you should be downloading, or what product you should be buying. If you don't know anything about that brand, if you don't really know what that brand represents, right? Execution of the brand. So this is usually the fun part, right? This is the time where we can now create. We can begin to take all of these things that we gathered during the brand positioning process, and put them together and turn them into fun things like naming, design, content, copy, colors, photography, strategy, planning, all of these things that are fun to do. And you'd be surprised how much more focused this process is when you have a perspective than when you don't have a perspective. And instead of the brand elements feeling like a bridge made out of rope, where each section of that bridge is connected to the previous section, it should feel more like a steel bridge that has plenty of support, plenty of planning, and plenty of engineering within it. I can actually get across that bridge made of rope. I can get to the other side, but while I was crossing, I was nervous. It was shaky. I did not have trust in the process, and most likely, I won't. If I have the option, I won't ever go try to cross that bridge again. But I didn't even question the stability of the steel bridge, right? I had complete confidence in the experience, which caused me not to second guess it, right? Analogies. So we'll look at a case study that we did for a boutique hotel in Savannah, Georgia. The hotel is called The Present. And so for this brand, it was all about not missing an opportunity to savor the moment, right? So, as we worked through this, we settled on a brand essence that is, you are here, okay? So from that brand essence, we moved on to the logo, and the logo is basically a hourglass without sand, right? And that symbolizes sort of ignoring the passing of time, right? Not worrying about having to be somewhere, not worrying, just enjoying the moment, right? We also created these journals that we gave to each guest that was in their rooms, and they were able to take the journals with them, and if they went out, they could document what they were doing, whether it was outside of the hotel or inside the hotel, but it was just something that allowed them to stop and appreciate the moment and to be able to go back and remember, pieces of their adventure. What's really cool about this hotel is that no two rooms in the hotel are the same, right? You get a completely different experience in every room. So you can come back to this place, 15, 20 times and get a completely different experience. So if y'all are ever in Savannah, Georgia, stay at The Present. I'm telling you, it's dope. So a strong brand perspective can allow you to change the rules. So I have an example here of a brand, Supreme. I'm sure y'all are at least familiar with this brand. I didn't work on any of this stuff. Wish I did work on it. But I just felt like it was a really good example of this idea of a brand that changes the rules sometimes. So look, Supreme does whatever the F it wants, okay? As a brand, they really change how customers react or interact with them, and that's only because they have been completely unwavering in their perspective, right? For them, it's about exclusivity. It's about being on the inside. It's about being counted as supreme, right? I think it originally started as a group of kids who skateboarded, and they just all had these Supreme t-shirts, and basically they saw people just wanted them just to be considered inside the circle, and they figured out a way to make the brand all about that. And to the point where they do things like they only allow 10 people in a store at a time so that they can manufacture these super long lines, right? Sort of playing off this idea of exclusivity. And I know because I've stood in that line, right? That line was easily an hour and a half. I will admit I did not make it to the front because I wasn't about that life, right? I tried to be about that life, but I wasn't about it. So I got out of it. But that's something that they can do because people expect that from that brand. You know, they've even done things like, print on Metro cards in like a New York subway, and they damn near caused a riot down there. The police had to come shut the whole thing down. Like that's how much people react to this brand, and that's obviously only because they are unwavering in their perspective. So that actually leads me to this next idea of commit to your perspective. Some perspectives take guts, right? Some are bold. Some may be even controversial. But making changes based off a few negative reactions or something your mother said, could actually do more harm than good. It's important to remember that a single brand won't fit everyone. It won't ever fit everyone, okay? And that's okay. What you really do not want is your brand's perspective to be one thing one day and then a completely different thing another day based on trends or whatever people are saying, right? You need to be steadfast in your perspective. Once people believe that you are who you say you are, you're less likely to be second guessed, okay? This is true in branding. This is true in life, honestly. So this is very important to commit to your perspective. Maintaining the perspective. Most likely, you all out here are in this phase, right? You're working for brands that's probably been around for a while, and it's your job to continue the brand story through all of these different elements. So that's strategy, like I was saying before, strategy, design, development, messaging, planning, and other things, right? Sometimes this can be the not so fun part, but it's honestly the most important part, if you think about it. It's the part where the audience decides whether or not to continue to engage with your brand. And all of this work that you've done to gain a rapport with the audience, you don't want to all of a sudden just abandon all of the work that you've done up until now. Hopefully in this phase, you're at the point where you're not just maintaining the brand, but maybe even expanding the brand. So I want to move on to this idea that no task is too small to carry the brand forward. Okay? Sometimes it's the little things, right? And this is a tough one, right? This is a tough one when, you're knee deep in solving a large-scale design problem or troubleshooting an annoying issue. Even though, this may not seem true at the time, there's always an opportunity to push the brand story forward, right? Sometimes it's helpful to stop what you're doing and consider more than just your part of a project. And what that can do is, lead you to not only find the right solution that works perfectly, but you'll also find that it actually just makes way more sense. So just remember that, no task is too small to carry the brand forward. Your personal perspective is valid. Now, I want to be clear here. This does not mean that you should ignore everyone's feedback. It does not mean that. Nor does it mean, you should exclude the voice of the people the brand serves, okay? This is not a license to do either of those things. What this does is you know, don't ever feel like you bring absolutely nothing to the table. Okay, that's what it means effectively. You know, you may not be the target demographic, but your insight is at the very least worth putting out there. At the very least, you know, I've done work for tons of brands where I was nowhere near the demographic, right? Did not have a personal connection to the people that this brand went after. And there have actually been times where I had to say to myself, you know, I saw what the brand was selling and said to myself, you know, why on earth would anybody pay for this? I don't understand, right? But even that skepticism, you know, even that helped fill the holes in brand story. Another case study. This is a automobile museum in Memphis. We had the pleasure of doing some brand work and experience design for the museum. This is a really fun project. The logo itself, it combines the shape of the state of Tennessee with like a rally flag from races. And so, like, you know, it's similar to like what you see on a Corvette, sort of the rally flag that's flying. And so I took those two ideas and put them together, and then the star is right over where Memphis is in the state. All of the colors represent colors that you would see on the road. So you have the different grays, you have the yellows that you would see, and the amber oranges that you might see in the turning signal. But to keep things consistent, we really had to make sure that all of the touch points, both inside and outside of the museum, felt like, you know, they all came from a similar perspective. You know, so, you know, future encounters with the brand would feel similar. In order for us to maintain the brand perspective, you know, we created a few campaigns and that pushed the brand story forward. So first thing we did was a poster series that featured illustrations of these classic cars, right? And the illustrations were paired with sort of period-specific exclamations. So think about age-appropriate cursing, you know, which probably what would have been the reaction to you seeing this car during that time when it came out. So we did these. These are screen printed on French paper, and we worked with Valhalla Studios to do the printing. These were fun to work on. Turned out great. And so we also worked on a ad campaign, and the idea around this ad campaign was that this was more than just a museum, right? And so we took all of these ideas. When you go into sort of these stuffy, you know, museums, you can't touch anything, can't take photos, you know, you have to be quiet. We took all these ideas and we sort of turned them on its head. Don't let anything slide. You know, consistency is key. There'll be times when you're working on something and, you know, you're trying to be intentional about moving the brand forward, but you kind of feel like sometimes your efforts are futile, you know? Listen, it always pays off to try to push the brand forward, okay? It may not even pay off while you're still working on the brand, and it may pay off immediately. But it's important that when you look back at what you offered to this brand, it's important that you feel like you did what you needed to do. This work should be fun, right? You know, in the end, the fact that we get to do this type of work, you know, is really amazing. When you really think about it, solving creative problems is an adventure, you know, unto itself. And, you know, there's obviously highs, there are lows, but we get the privilege to take that adventure every day, you know. So even though this is challenging, you try to stay grateful and even optimistic throughout the process. This is actually something that I've had to really work on myself, and I'm still working on. But staying optimistic throughout the process and remembering the fact that you get to do something fun every day is really important and honestly makes all of the difference. So, final thought. I kind of went back and forth over whether or not I would, mention this, but this is my first talk at this scale, and it was definitely something that stretched me beyond my comfort zone. Okay, up until a few months ago, I was convinced that I didn't really have anything valuable enough worth sharing, definitely on this scale. But I realized quickly that, I had been effectively invalidating my voice and my perspective. And, I think at the very least, it's worth me just sharing a few things that's been helpful to me. And, with a couple of nudges from Gina, I decided to do it, and I'm super glad I did. I hope this encourages some of you to test the limits of your comfort zone. You might be surprised at what comes out on the other end. So that's it, guys. That's it. Thanks to everyone who listened today. I hope this talk is helpful to some of you. I'm really excited about the speakers coming up over the next few days, and I'll be right here watching along with y'all. And so if you need to connect, my info is actually in the slides, so feel free to connect on whatever social media platform. And yeah, hope y'all enjoy the conference. Y'all have a good one.
Ben, oh man, that was such a great talk. I have so many questions for you, and there are so many questions in the chat too. I'm just going to fire away if that's cool.
Sounds good.
First, the most important question is, what do you think sprinters eat before a race? Nothing. They fast. Sorry. It's going to be a long day. All right. Lots of good questions here. Let's start with some audience questions. You probably are absorbed with looking at brands all the time, seeing what they do, seeing what's out there in the world. One of the questions in the chat from Amari is, what brands have you seen that have created really great brand essence? Are there some, you mentioned Supreme in the talk. Are there other ones that you just kind of look up to and go, like, they're doing, all of the stuff that you recommended, they're doing it, to the best degree?
Well, I mean, the one that everyone talks about is, or the two, I guess, Nike and Apple, the two brands where, you know what to expect. If you're a repeat buyer, when you walk in to the store or go to the website, you know that, they're going to talk to you a certain way and you're comfortable in that. And so you know what to expect. So you don't usually, if you buy a lot of Nikes, you probably don't go to Adidas as much or any of the other shoe brands because you have established this sort of connection with that brand. So, I mean, Nike and Apple is kind of the obvious one, but they do a really good job of that.
Gotcha. Cool. Let's go. I want to go back to the present, the work that you showed for the present.
Yeah. Beautiful
work, and you glossed through it. So now that we have a little bit more time, can you tell us a little bit about the process of how do you arrive at something like the brand essence? Like how you are here and that empty hourglass. How did you get to that point? Like, what were some of the insights that you found in that process? Like, and how did you come up with that concept that led to the brand essence, or the brand essence that led to the concept? I don't know which one came first.
Well, first we went and stayed at the hotel, and it was before they were done with everything. But what we saw immediately was how unique this place was going to be, and it's sort of unlike a lot of hotel experiences, for one. And then this aspect of when you travel, the hotel sometimes tries to get in the way of the trip, like tries to be like, the hotel is never the star of the trip typically. And so instead of making it about, we have these type of linens and we have this type of service. It's about, you're here to travel. You're here to experience something. We're a small part of your experience, but we understand that it's more important that you have this adventure than us be all sort of in your face. And so we wanted to play up the idea of the adventure, the journey, and being able to sort of stop in the middle of an adventure or journey to appreciate where you are. Certainly right now with COVID-19, like I'm thinking back to adventures that I've taken that I currently can't take, but yeah, we wanted to play that up, to make the guests feel comfortable with just stopping and considering where they are right now and appreciating that.
Was that something that the hotel told you before you did the work, or was that something that you experienced in staying there that like, oh, this is something that we are feeling right now because of the experience? Yeah.
So, I mean, we gather a ton of information. So with the client and the industry, something, one of the things that we got from the client is that, we want this to feel like a one of a kind experience. We feel like that's important. And so we sort of took a lot of those notes and figured out a way to articulate them. And so, the phrase "you are here" really was, there were some ideas that we didn't include in there, and that's okay. But we wanted to really like boil it down to a syrupy concentrate, for another analogy. So it was a combination of preferences from client and stuff we've seen around the industry. And we basically took all of that and narrowed it down to this 3-word brand essence.
Nice. That's awesome. There's a good question in the chat from Asia, and she says, like, how about creating a brand for yourself? Is that different than creating a brand for like a client or a business? Like, do you see those different things?
Listen, I'm, the funny thing is I'm currently doing that right now. I'm currently working through this right now. I'm working on another business right now, and it's time to start thinking about the branding for this business, and it's harder than anything because sometimes design is problem solving, right? And so when someone comes to you and presents a problem, you can think more objectively, and you can say, all right, let me consider everything, and you're sort of outside of it, and so it's hard to think to do design work for yourself with the idea that it's problem solving, because you just don't feel the same way. It's more about you and your expression at that point a lot of times. And so, yes, it's way harder. Some people are able to do this like easy, but I've had like sort of personal logos throughout the years. I probably had 20. I'll change my personal logo like maybe every 5 years. So a lot harder to do branding for personal projects for sure.
It's really liberating to hear you say that, because I feel the same thing. Like whenever I would do my own logo, I would change it all the time because I was never satisfied with it, because I'm like, it just never, I don't know if it's doing the trick, and I love the phrase that you're not outside of it. You're literally inside of it. And it wasn't until I had a friend draw my logo that I was like, oh, I could keep that one. That one's really good. And same thing for the Super Friendly brand too. Like, I love the Super Friendly brand. I had to hire a friend to do it because there was no way that I was going to be able to do it on my own. So it's really good to hear kind of the permission from you to be able to do that everybody experiences that. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Supreme for a little bit. Like you mentioned a lot of things about Supreme. One of the things that really jumped out at me is you used a great word. You used the word unwavering, right? Like that's what Supreme is. They just stick to their thing, and no matter what. How do you get to be able to have a brand like that? Like, is that an ingredient? Like, do you have to start with unwaveringness, or is that an output? Is that something that, you build your brand up and you get that brand equity and then you get to be unwavering? Like, does it come in as an input or is it an output?
Yeah, it's a little bit chicken egg situation. The term "fake it till you make it" comes to mind. I always encourage clients to be bold in whatever perspective that they have, whatever their positioning is, with the understanding that when you launch this brand, there may be people who don't connect with the brand. There may be people who don't feel like it connects to them. And, it does take for you to get to where Supreme is, they started Unwavering. I would imagine they started like, this is how we're going to do this. No matter, no matter how many people buy our t-shirts, we're gonna operate as if you need to be on the inside of this circle. And so I think the strongest brands start as bold as possible, so that on day one or on day 1,000, what the things that you're saying and believing are consistent with what you were saying and believing on day one. And that there's a lot of value in that when it comes to a user, when they say that they've been that way since the very beginning. I think it's valuable to start off bold, for sure.
Yeah. On a related note, let's talk about the audience part, because you mentioned that as like one of the ingredients, in brand. And you mentioned about like committing to your perspective. And one of the things that I've learned about good brand work is like most brands can't be for everyone, right? Most brands can't be for every single audience in the world. So at some point you have to choose who is not your audience, right? In doing that audience with who is. Can you talk a little bit about like what's the process for doing that? Like, who do you decide who it's not for? What during the time where you're deciding who it is for?
Well, that's a tough one, especially for some brands. We do a lot of work for nonprofits, and with nonprofits, a lot of times there are multiple targets. You have the target that's the work that you do is for a specific person or a group, and that's a target. But a lot of times there's this dual audience of donors, and so you have to sort of use, when you're speaking to the end user, you almost have to send out side cues to know that donors are also listening too, and to get them passionate to giving too. So, but with that in mind, when you're conveying a message, you have to prioritize. Okay, you can't speak in the middle of the two, because you won't speak to either one of them. You need to look one in the eye and talk to them. And if some of the things that you say to that person, is music to the ear of a donor, fantastic. But you cannot look between the two at the wall and start, talking about something, because they both will think you're crazy. So if you're speaking to donors, you can speak to them a certain way, and just be mindful of the things you say and how, the user might pick up when you're talking to donors. So yeah, I'd definitely say, priority, make a priority, stick to it, and just stick to that.
That's such a good analogy. You can't speak in the middle of them, because you're not talking to either. That's awesome. All right, 2 more questions for you. We'll end on a little bit of a personal note here. One is in the chat. Nessa mentions, and you said this in your talk, that this was your first talk that you've done at this scale. Amazing. How does it feel now to be given, to have given your first talk like that?
Relief, first off, that we're nearing the end. But it feels good. I mean, it took a push, it took a nudge, and I have definitely like turned down talks just because, I freeze and start shaking or whatever. But again, like I was saying earlier, what I had to realize, especially like right now, is so important for you to sort of make your voice heard and just like share whatever, any sort of valuable nugget or information that you have, sharing that right now. It's more important now than ever. And so it feels good. I'm glad it took a push. It definitely took a push. And I'm glad, Gina and her team pushed, because, it's cool. It's great to meet everybody. It's great to hear people's feedback. And so I'm happy to have done it, for sure.
That's awesome. Well, we're all better for it. Thank you for all the nuggets that you shared. Last thing I've got, we can't ignore this. Lots of questions in the chat about it. It's all through your talk. Let's talk sneakers. You got a poster of an AJ11 in the background.
Let's go. Yeah.
A big AJ1 fan and an Air Max 90 fan. You said you're working on it, which is a thing that I think all sneakerheads say. I say the same thing. I say like, I got about 70 pairs and I'm working on it. I'm working my way down. What do you got? Yeah. What's your sneaker collection look like right now? What are your favorites and how are you working on it?
Well, I have a wife and and kids. And so, I have to be responsible. So that's the tough part, and then also like with resale being all huge, like, prices are inflated and all that stuff. But my favorite pair in my closet are probably my Fear of God ones, and a pair of let's see, I don't know. I have the off-white Zoom flies. Those are probably my two favorite pairs. I love AJ ones. They're impossible to get unless you want to drop $300 above the retail. But I have I don't know. So I have a lot of those as well.
Right.
But yeah, I'm working on it. I still have a ways to go. Like, my wife doesn't agree. She feels like I've gone too far, probably.
Sure.
But yeah, I'll get there.
That's awesome. Well, Ben, thank you so much for this. This was awesome. What a great talk. Thank you for joining Clarity.